Good morning. Is it morning still? Good morning. I'm Barb Guy. I'm the Director of Special Education for the state at the Department of Education. And we're thrilled to be here. I'll let Kelsey introduce herself.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Kelsey Teeter. I'm the Secondary Special Education Program Consultant with the Department of Ed. Really, that's just another way of saying Secondary Transition Consultant. It's great to be here with you today.
So to start with, especially since it's a small enough group, if we could just take maybe a minute or two at your table and talk with each other about why you chose this session with all the great sessions that are out there. Why did you choose this one? Because we only have an hour, and I want to make sure we address the information that you're after. And frankly, some of the information I think is somewhat dry, so we want to make sure it's interesting for you. So let's just take, if you're sitting by yourself, you don't have to talk to yourself. You probably know why you're here. So we'll just take a minute or two, okay? All right, I know that isn't very much time, but I want to make sure we can have time to address everything. Anybody want to share why you chose this session?
I mentioned earlier that I work for an organization in Northwest Iowa, and I am the vocational and educational specialist, which means I should know things about both of those areas. And I find that getting information about employment, vocation is a lot easier than education in the system. So anything education related, I'll be probably in that session.
I'm Roxanne Cummings, and I'm the Director of Special Education for DCG. And we'll be engaging in IDEA, DA, Differentiated Accountability work this coming school year. And I'd like to learn more about it today.
Great. Anybody else?
Hi, I'm Joy Barleen. I'm a parent. I actually have kids that they're 11, almost 12, or entering into middle school, and I know that we need to be thinking about this now.
Okay, then we'll go ahead and get started. Oh, one more time. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Mary Chadwick, and I live in the Des Moines area. I homeschool our daughter, who's going to be 14 in November. And what I've learned as I've transitioned in this from ages 14 to 16, there are very limited to no services for voc rehab for them.
Okay, then we'll probably, our plan today is really focusing, I'm going to do the first 5 slides or so and talk about kind of more the theory and the legislation. And then Kelsey's going to talk about how we're applying the structure that we've created to help improve services in districts, right? To help teachers and administrators connect more with the post-secondary world, because we know preparation takes a while, and we know that kids who are in school will never have the same amount of resources available to them once they exit school. So we'll start with that, and I'm starting again with the law. You may, and if I stand here, can you guys see the screen okay? Okay. The IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, actually has regulations that the state must create a system of, well, they call it a general system, or general supervision system that I'll talk about in a moment. But one component of that system has to also be on monitoring. And you may have, if you've been paying attention to any of the conversations that are going on right now with the legislation with House File 2612, there's a lot of bandying around of the term compliance. And it means different things to different people. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we at the department view monitoring and our responsibilities. The thing that's really important about this language, I've highlighted in blue. The first one is, and if you don't do a lot of legal interpretation, rules reading, lucky you, but for those of us who do, generally when rules are put into place, the thing that's first is what's considered the most important. And then the subsequent language tends to follow after that. That's not always true, but it's generally true. So if you notice, A in blue says that the primary focus of our monitoring must be on improving educational results and functional outcomes. And then it talks about emphasis on those procedural compliance that have the most effect on outcomes. And historically, we have focused on B and less on A. And I think that's because primarily we didn't have the technology. We now have technology that we can drill down to a student level. So we can look at outcomes. And this has been happening over the last decade or so. But now we're at a place, and our state has really been working to try to combine the two. Courts, for example, if maybe there's a procedural violation, you didn't meet your 60-day timeline, but you made it in 62 days or 65 days, and it didn't affect the child's free appropriate public education. That's a procedural violation. Technically, in my mind, even though we haven't gotten there, I think, broadly, compliance is both of these. Good outcomes and the right procedures. So what we've tried to design with IDEA-DA is an emphasis on outcomes. I just stuck this slide in this morning, Kelsey, surprise, because I think there's so much conversation right now about what's the role of the AEAs for compliance, what's the role of the DE for compliance, that I really want to emphasize that all of us, as parents, as educators, as administrators, as special educators, have a professional, personal responsibility to ensure that we're following the rules and regulations and that we're helping kids succeed. And I think sometimes that gets lost, and we think about it as a big checklist and a review of like a gotcha, and that's not the outcome. That's not what we're trying to do. So when we talk about general supervision in our state, it looks like there's 5, but there's really only 4 duties, and that's that infinity. We have a duty to inform. We have a duty to prevent. We have a duty to inspect and detect. That's together because it's really hard to tease out inspecting and detecting. And we have a duty to correct. And it's an infinity loop. And all of us have some responsibility for this. But depending upon what agency level we work at, it may be greater. So I'm not going to go into all the other things, but I just want you to know that we have many components that we do at the department around general supervision. And one of the things we do is IDEA-DA, which is continuous improvement. And I'm going to give a few more details about what it is, and then Kelsey will talk through how it works for secondary transition. So it's our accountability model that we use. Most of the country calls it results-based accountability, but what we do is instead of looking at, pulling IEPs every 5 years, going on site, seeing what's occurring, we start with how is the district accomplishing outcomes? Are kids succeeding? So when we talk about, we have something that's known as an implementation support rubric. I'm going to go up here, out of order here, that focuses on these 4 areas of outcomes. These are all embedded concepts or principles in IDEA-DA. And what we've done is identify 4 areas. And each of those 4 areas, we have data. So we look at data for districts in each of these 4 areas. We give them each of these account for 25% of a score. And then based on that score, a district will be assigned a level of support. And then in the 2 areas that have a red square around them, I guess it's a rectangle, sorry. I hated geometry, and I admit to cheating, so I can never remember which was a square, is a rectangle. But so anyway, the red line around the outside of those, they those are the two areas that we know from our data we need to help districts with the most, because we're not getting the kinds of services or outcomes that kids deserve, kids and families deserve. So we get a score of up to 100, and then based on that score, we assign districts a level of support. If they're a level 3, there are a number of things that they're required to do that are more intensive. They get more intense supports from us, including some professional learning and coaching. If they're a level 2, they get a little fewer supports, and if they're level 1, they get a lot of opportunities to self-guide through materials and supports. They're assigned to a 3-year cycle. This year, so last year was the first year we rolled this out. The scores can go to 100, as I said. We had 3 districts that were 80 or above. Everybody else was clumped together, so we have a lot of room for improvement. Yeah, the question is that public knowledge? Could I go on and see? We have a link. We can give you a link to the website, the DE website that has every district and their determination level and their score for the implementation support rubric. That's a great question. We'll get that for you. Yep, okay. Kelsey said we'll put that in the resources. Academic success. And we're focusing on early literacy right now within that academic success. Yeah. So the question is, will we have access to the PowerPoint? The answer is yes. We'll get that for you. We'll also give you some links on the website. There is also a Google site that has a lot of information from like previous webinars we've done that describe the model that we've used, where the model came from, why we chose it. So the folks who created the district profiles for ESSA, they helped us with the model. So it's very similar in concept from that. Karen. Okay, so we will make sure that we get the information to Ask Resource, and then that information will be put up on the website for the Together We Can conference. Good. Any other questions right now? Kelsey, anything that I kind of skipped over you want me to go back to? Maybe I'll go through this four pieces. So I just described this first number 1, which is the implementation support rubric. We at the department apply those data. We set cut scores, we assign them. Then they are assigned to that level for 3 years. Then each district completes a review. We have deeper data that they go into that we know link specifically to effective strategies for that content area. So that's to help guide them to what's an effective strategy for improvement and what their data are telling them that they need. Then the district develops an implementation plan because we know change takes time. And this is about change. And districts then begin in the engagement, and Kelsey will talk about that a little bit more. I think what I would like to just say is, again, our first year, it's taken a number of years to build this. Last year was our first year of launching it. And the good news for me, so the level 3 districts a year ago spring did their data review process. And, I came back saying, the good news is the model works. Because the bad news is we identified some districts that really do need a lot of support. I was surprised about the level of support that some of them needed, not all of them. So it's kind of the good, bad news. Anything else you want me to cover? I think this is the outcome we all share, so I'm not going to spend much time on this. Let's get to the meat of it. This slide describes what is happening for each of the districts, and so it's level 1 is this end of the arrow, Level 3 supports are the far end. And basically, it's a difference between us, the department, telling what the content area versus getting to choose from one of those two content areas. Having to participate in the trainings that are mandated or having some variation of that, and the amount of coaching and follow-up that might be received. And we go from less significant to more intense. I just want to make sure we get to you. There we go.
Perfect. Thank you, Barb. That was a great introduction. So, as Barb said, there are a number of different pieces that go into this system of differentiated accountability, right? So she mentioned the teaming, the monthly training, the coaching, the action planning, coaching supports, and fidelity measures. We're going to go dive a bit deeper into all of those so you have a better understanding of what our districts are going through and experiencing as they work through this system. So just to give you an idea, this is what our determination data looks like for secondary transition. And what I've shared up on the screen today is our state data, so statewide averages. And so you'll be able to look closer at this when the slide deck is posted and available to you as well. But what you can see from looking at this data is A, some of the discrepancies between students with IEPs and students that do not have IEPs. But then you can also see that these data points are specifically focused on some of those really high leverage indicators. So we're looking at the percent of students with an IEP graduating within 5 years. We're looking at our B14 post-secondary outcomes. So that's 1 year out. Where are our students with IEPs? What are they doing? Are they engaged in employment or education? Or not, you know? As you can see, 1 year out, about 66% of our students with IEPs are not engaged in any employment or education, and that's what we're concerned about, right? Percentage of students with IEPs who exited special ed due to dropping out, so that's our IEP dropout rate, right? Again, that number's a lot higher than we'd like for it to be as well. Then we look at proficiency in English language arts and math. And then we also look at chronic absenteeism, which again, you can see at that bottom data point there is a discrepancy between students with IEPs and without in terms of chronic absenteeism. So that's something that we would like to see improvement on as well. So each content area has a data review chart like this that they look at to determine what their areas of focus are going to be within their content area. So as we're digging into that data, we're going to use that data to inform what we're going to focus on and what areas we want to grow and improve on to support our students, right? So once a district is identified with secondary transition, for example, we're diving even deeper to identify a sub-area focus. So I just mentioned those B14 outcomes, right? So education or employment. Which one is going to be the priority? Which one do they want to focus on first? And then from there, we determine what high leverage practices they want to focus on building and improving in their system as well. So based on the different level, you can kind of see what that data review process looks like. The higher the level the district is identified for, of course, the more support they're going to get in going through that data review process to identify their priorities. So as we look at that more additional in-depth data, you can see there's a number of different criteria we look at to support program development as we move through the continuous improvement process. So the ISR is our implementation support rubric. I apologize, that's not on the slide. But basically what that does is looks at data around some of those really high leverage post-secondary predictors, proven post-secondary predictors, and helps us identify where are we at right now, where do we want to go, and how are we going to get there. And then we also disaggregate that data so districts can see how are their students with IEPs doing compared to non-IEPs, and how are their students with BIPs or on alt assessment doing compared to other students. So for example, one of the data points we look at is career technical education, because we know, and you'll see on another slide here in a minute, but we know that students that become concentrators in a career technical education course are like 95%, give or take, right? 95% more likely, or at a rate of 95%, going to go on to post-secondary education or employment within a year of leaving high school. So we know that that's a proven predictor of post-secondary success. So of course we want to see more students participating in CTE developing meaningful employment skills and technical skills that they can then carry with them into their future. Same thing, we're looking at like paid employment while they're in high school. We know that that's a proven predictor of post-secondary success. Engaging with voc rehab services, inclusion in the gen ed environment, chronic absenteeism, all of those things that really like play into how are our students going to be successful when they leave us here in the schools. Absolutely.
So back to your question about data. The data that are on the website are kind of big screen picture of what the determination and their total score. If you email either Kelsey or me, the implementation support rubric data are public information, so it's not posted, but if you send it to us, we will send us an inquiry, we'll send you your districts. These data that she's talking about now, some of them, they're for the district to use, and so we gave them data that may have a really small cell size, so they might be personally identifiable. So these data we would have to, these data may or may not be, they would be harder for us to get to, but we could probably get to it if you wanted that level. Go ahead, Jeff. Well, if they would choose not to participate, we might be visiting them. Honestly, I will tell you, we haven't received that, right? The reception that we've had from this in conversations with districts, first there's a little reluctance. We have some districts who have never been identified for gen ed students who were identified here who are like, that can't be true. So there's been a little bit about the data, but then once we get into this stage and dig into the conversations, they haven't always had this detailed look for those students who are on IEPs in their system. And so I haven't been to any that have, once I get into that conversation, have walked away from it, right? They've been really rich conversations. And we are, very often, we have at the department set up a process where people have gotten used to just going through the hoop. And we are really trying to send a message that we are in partnership with you on this one because we know change takes time. And this is huge. For some people, it's a mindset change. For some people, it's a resource allocation change. And in some places, it's a skill development change. So those are big things that we know we're going to take some time to make an effect. And the sad thing is, we all know that it can be generations of students, right? 3 years, 4 years, that's a whole generation of as a class. So the question is, what's that partnership look like going forward? What we have said is our expectations for districts is not changing. What we have to figure out are the structures that we're going to be able to provide the supports that they need in order to make the kinds of changes. So for example, we're still with the legislature, everything we're talking about right now has been in deep partnership in development with our AEAs. Deep partnership. They are the people who have been the coaches. They helped us set all of the implementation rubrics and cut scores. It's been joint decision making, joint development. What we don't know now is what structures will be there to continue the professional learning, to continue the coaching, but we're committed to that. And so whether it's a matter of helping the AEAs with it or looking for other ways, that's the conversation that we'll be in the next couple of months, really. So the question is, will AEAs be allowed to provide that continued support to districts? So the conversation that we're having, and again, it's all emerging. Our priority at the department right now has been filling the 62 positions that are new from the legislation. And then once we have, there are positions posted for regional special ed directors, and those positions actually close, I think, on Monday. And we are aggressively, even for the department, aggressively moving the timeline so that we hope to have those identified by the end of the month. And that will help us, I believe in collaborative decision making and problem solving and design. And so once we have those folks in place, that will help, I think, with some of these questions. Our approach, if you look at the language, special ed services are still part of the AEA responsibility. And if you would go back into chapter 41 and look at the procedures, and I can't remember, I think it's the 400s, there's a list of procedures and policies that AEAs must do. Very little of that is changed by the House File 2612. So that's our guiding post right now. We are sticking with those procedures and responsibilities for the AEAs as we plan going forward.
Okay, so kind of looking back at the data again, we talked through what some of those data points are. Now I want to share this next slide to help you kind of understand why these data points matter, right? So NTAC-C is the National Technical Assistance Center on Transition, the collaborative. So it's really a national entity that does a lot of research and demonstration and support for states to develop best practices, evidence-based practices in the area of transition. They're the like national experts, right? So as you can see, as far as employment and education outcomes go, we really wanted to base the data points we're looking at and tracking on what we know works and what we know is going to be good for students and what we know is going to help them achieve their goals. So like, for example, as you're sitting in IEP meetings for your students or your child, you know, these are things I would encourage you to ask about. Look at, like, how can we incorporate some of these things into my student's plan because we know they work, right? And what does that look like in the district that you're in? Because these are the things that we know make a difference, and that's why we're looking at those specific data points. So to kind of summarize how far we've come, excuse me, so far, so secondary transition, right? A district's identified for secondary transition, or if they're a level 1 district, they might choose secondary transition as their focus area. And then from there, we look at the data and we identify, okay, are we gonna focus on our post-secondary employment outcomes, or are we gonna focus on our post-secondary education outcomes? And then from there, we engage in professional learning. That's where that professional learning piece comes in. So no matter which focus area you choose, each district is going to participate in learning around SDI, the Specially Designed Instruction Framework. And then based on their second set of data, right, they're going to identify, are they going to intentionally engage in learning and development around work-based learning, career technical education, or post-secondary education preparation. So those are what we call our professional learning packages. So if you hear people talking about professional learning packages, that's in a nutshell what that looks like for secondary transition. The content-specific courses are for each focus area, and depending what level the district is, that really drives an important component of that professional learning package, and that's that coaching piece. So not only are they participating in like a structured large group learning on a monthly basis, give or take, but then there's also coaching supports embedded to support the teachers with actually implementing the learning that they're getting in each session, okay? So for level 3 districts, that's twice a month for each teacher. For level 2 districts, that's once a month for each teacher. And for level 1, it's recommended, it's optional. They can kind of drive what they want that coaching support to look like in partnership with their coaches. So the SDI course for secondary transition looks like this. It's 4 modules, and it just does an overview. It introduces the framework for SDI applied to a secondary transition lens. Literacy has the same thing. It's more of a general. It was developed for literacy, and then we adapted it to secondary transition. Barb, did you want to talk a little bit about the history of the SDI framework? Awesome.
I was just sneaking in to see how much time I had. That's okay. So the SDI framework, Specially Designed Instruction Framework, is something that was developed, almost, I think, 14 years ago. We started working on it with input from many, many, many stakeholders. Some of you in this room were part of it. But it basically is four concepts that what we learned, it started because a bunch of us got together to say how effective is our specially designed instruction, and what we recognized is that across the 10 of us in the room and cumulatively probably 100 years of experience, we could not agree on a behavioral definition that we could go in and measure in a classroom whether or not it was effective. So we took a step back and said, what really is it? So this is not, it's really not earth-shattering, but what we wanted was, and we call it a framework so that it works across any content area, and it gives us language to talk with each other around it. So the 4 components of the SDI framework, the very first one is to diagnose for instruction, for instructional delivery, right? Diagnose for design, instructional design. Not diagnose for a label or eligibility, but what does this child need to learn? And then the second part of it, the next stage then, is take that information and design the instruction specific to this individual, and then deliver that instruction for engagement and repeat as necessary for children to advance. And what the beauty of that then is, as a classroom teacher where I have a wide range of characteristics, learners have a wide range of characteristics. So I may have somebody who's on the spectrum, but I may have somebody who has visual impairments. Well, what they need, or the strategies I need to use with those individuals, are different. Like the assessment I would use for somebody on the spectrum would be very different than somebody who has visual impairments, or they may cross over. But the whole time I'm talking or coaching with somebody, I'm talking about those 4 steps. And sometimes, and in some ways, we got away from the actual design of special instruction or special education and did a lot of tutoring. And so now we're trying to pull it back into that concept. And I'm going to give a really concrete example for this field, for secondary transition. So it's very common when you think about work experience. Work experience, especially paid work experience in high school, is one of those predictors that Kelsey was talking about. But if you're working with a student who's on the spectrum or may have some mental health issues, repeated job experiences or even job exploration is not a good strategy. It's not effective for them because they don't transition well. So it's better to think about it in long term and look at settings that they can move in and out of. And maybe one of the skills you're actually going to help them with, especially if it's somebody with mental health. I've worked with adults with mental health issues. It's how to help them monitor when they exit from a job so that the employer would still write a letter of reference for them in their next job. So and that helps you, so that just is an idea of how we want to get back to the specially designed and individualized.
Yeah, so like she said, really looking at each student individually and what their needs might be. So this kind of summarizes what those PL packages look like for each level of district. So you kind of have a visual based on what I've just explained. The facilitated content, the coaching supports, and the system check-ins. Okay, so I wish this slide had been before the last slide because that would have just made so much more sense, but that's okay. So going back to the secondary transition framework, I wanted to talk about this for a couple minutes because this is really important, because this is really going to be the meat and potatoes of how we do business in high schools. Like that's the goal, right? Like Barb said, drilling down to that individual student's needs through a systemic process of diagnose, design, and deliver, and engage, right? So secondary transition, and I mean, I am a little biased, but it's by far the most important work that we do in our schools, right? But it is also a little bit different than the other content areas too, because it is really focused on our post-secondary expectations. And that is the very first step. And so you see in our model for the SAI framework, we actually do 2 rounds of diagnosing instead of 1. That's a difference between secondary transition and literacy that's important to point out, because that very first step drives the rest of everything else that we do in that student's plan. So that first step is diagnosing to determine the post-secondary expectations. You might hear them called PSEs for short. The post-secondary expectations are what is put in that little box, or what you talk about as those goals for living, learning, and working. So after the student leaves us in high school, where are they going to be living? What is their goal for working, and what is their goal for learning? From there, then you do diagnose again, right? And you diagnose for how are we going to help the student meet those goals. So Joey wants to be a car mechanic. Okay, so we need to do diagnosis to determine, assessment to determine the services, supports, instruction that's needed to help close the gap in where Joey's skills are now and what he needs to be a car mechanic. Or maybe it's he wants to live independently in his own apartment with a roommate. Okay, let's diagnose and identify. A, what are the skills that he needs for his goal? B, what are his skills now? And then C, how do we get there? What instruction does he need? What supports does he need? What linkages, referrals does he need? All of those things go into that second step of diagnose. The third step is designing. That's that instructional delivery, where you're using evidence-based practices. We talked about some of those proven predictors, right? You're aligning to the Iowa core, you're age appropriate, and you're maximizing engagement and access. And then you're delivering, and that's monitoring instructional fidelity. That's coming back and making adjustments, changing the plan when it's not working, or changing the plan when it's working really well, and we need to set the bar higher. We need to move on to the next skill, right? That's the delivery piece. So it's just a constant cycle of diagnose, design, deliver, rinse, repeat, okay? Yes.
Kelsey's a little humble on this one. I think one of the things that I like about this, for those of you who've been around in the field, and hopefully for parents, that gives me some hope that we might see, is the linkage. We've had in Iowa something known as the Iowa Transition Assessment Model that has a lot of information about assessing, has some of the same skills, but I think that was primarily embraced by the folks who had the label of a transition coordinator or maybe a work experience coordinator. And we had a whole bunch of high school teachers who were still getting kids to the door, right? And we weren't connecting those. And transition by definition in IDEA is a coordinated set of activities. So we were treating transition as an activity and not as much about instruction and skill building. So by taking that transition assessment model and blending it with the SDI framework, what we're hoping to do is bring together those two different roles and use their strategies together to be more effective.
So once we've introduced and coached and practiced using the SDI framework for secondary transition, the next step is to apply those proven predictors, those practice courses that we talked about a little bit earlier, right? So that's the career technical education, work-based learning, or post-secondary education preparation. So how this really all ties together then is what we're looking at is A, what do we need to know about these different practices, these different services that students can engage in, to be able to help our students and support our students to access them and be successful in them? How do we even plan for that, right? And then identifying through that SDI framework, okay, so what's instruction is the student going to need? What specially designed instruction is the student going to need for success in this setting? What additional wraparound skill building support do I need to provide? What is it a support? Is it instruction? Is it collaboration with that CTE teacher? Is it a task analysis for a work-based learning experience where we can systematically design instruction to develop task-based skills? Is it post-secondary education preparation, partnering with the school counselor, identifying those really necessary skills for success at the higher education level? Is it, really anything? So it really drives home this connection between the SDI framework and the proven predictors of post-secondary success to ultimately better serve our students. I thought I saw you coming.
So one thing, if you take a notice at those three things that are circled, does anybody have high school kids right now, or teach high school, or work in a high school? Right, those should be familiar terms, right? Those are things that schools are working on, or maybe not. Maybe not, but many schools are starting to look at these three things. Many schools have focused on that C, the post-secondary education prep. I'm an Ames High grad. That tended to be an emphasis in Ames High, and with an exclusion of the other two. And I think that's changing statewide. But it's for all kids. So that's the power of this too. When teams get deep into their data, they can start making connections about what the improvements they're making for all kids, and then what might need to be extra or supplemented to make sure kids with disabilities are included in those school improvement efforts.
So this slide really just kind of gives a summary of what each practice course addresses, because we were really intentional in wanting to design them with some consistency around core concepts and application. Again, somewhat of a framework so that regardless of what content area or focus area you're looking at, if you have a basic understanding of work-based learning or CTE, really you can use the SDI framework in any environment or any practice or any course that you're identifying that student might need for their post-secondary expectations. So, so really we spent time trying to figure out, okay, so what does that actually look like and what are those key things? And these are really those pieces that we identified that embed a lot of those proven predictors and evidence-based practices into the big picture. There are obviously some content-specific differentiation, right? So career and technical education, in case you didn't know, and actually I've been surprised, this has been learning for a lot of folks that every high school in Iowa to be accredited has to offer 4 of the 6 service areas within career and technical education. So every accredited high school has at least 4 career technical education programs, and there are a total of 6, and it really encompasses the 6 different career clusters that you might hear teams talking about. We know that concentrators, I mentioned this earlier, when a student concentrates, their post-secondary opportunities increase. And so like taking 1 or 2 courses isn't enough, right? We want a student to take 3 or 4 to become a concentrator and really develop those meaningful skills for their future. So that's a lot of what we focus on in the CTE course specifically. And then also work-based learning is a continuum, right? So we don't want to just place students in jobs without having like gone through thorough like awareness, exploration, preparation, and training, right? So the first step is always awareness, helping the student become aware and exposed to the different opportunities that are available to them so that we know we can find a meaningful match. A lot of times our students don't have that type of exposure and experience. So that's where we really have to start. And then as we find what works well for them, what are their matches, we really tune into that preparation and training and development piece. And then post-secondary education preparation. This one is really the biggest one because the continuum of options for post-secondary education is so broad. Everything from Job Corps to technical school, trade school, 2-year programs, 4-year programs, 6 or 8-year programs, right? Even like post-secondary work-based learning programs. It's a huge scope, right? So we really have to come back to our roots of the SDI framework and identify those necessary skills, the proficiency in essential content, acquired practical skills, learning strategies, and self-understanding and self-engagement, and identify based on the environment that the student needs for their goal, what are the instruction, services, and supports that we're gonna provide to match that environment and that goal. So as we move through that learning, we do have some fidelity of implementation and coaching support tools in place, and these are really intended to be self-assessment strategies and reflection for the staff and coaches that are participating in the learning. So those are completed twice per year, and they're kept anonymous because, like I said, this is not us like trying to monitor how people think they're doing. It's really a tool for them to reflect on where are my areas of strength and where are the areas I need to continue to develop. But then it also, like that aggregated data, does allow us to look at what are the needs of the state, so that can inform future development as well, right? Where are the areas that teams need more support, more learning, more engagement? So we can look at that anonymous aggregated data to inform how we move our system forward. And then the last step really in the IDEA-DA process is progress reporting. So at the end of each school year, each district will submit a progress report that is, again, intended to help with self-monitoring and reviewing for progress, but then it also gives us the opportunity to provide feedback, suggestions, and support for districts that might need a little bit extra, or also identify what's working, what's not, and how we can make adjustments as a state team to better support AEAs and districts in the implementation process. So with that being said, we have a few minutes left, and we would love to open it up for questions.
I was just wondering, how do they determine which school districts are the level 1, level 2, level 3?
So on that score of 100, we did cut score. We looked at the data and said, where do we have enough resources to provide? So the lowest 10% of districts are level 3. And then we took a look at and I don't have I kind of treat data like my checkbook, which is not the best. So I'm not going to give you the actual numbers because we need to look it up. But send me an email and I can give you the cut scores for them. But let's just say they're at the lowest 10%, we took that highest district within that 10%, and it was like 56.6. This is hypothetical. Play with me on that one. The next lowest score was 56.61. So, I mean, there was almost no difference between, but we don't have enough resources to serve everyone. So we said, what do we have? And we took a look at the data for that next cut point, and there are another 65 districts, I think, that are level 2. So we have just under 100 districts that are level 2 or level 3, and everybody else is receiving level 1 supports. So, and then that will be, next year will be the third year, so we'll rerun the data and we'll recalibrate and look at it. What we're anticipating internally as we discuss this is that we know change takes time. The literacy package, the early literacy package, we know it took 2.5 to 3 years before teachers said that they were routinely or sustainedly using effective SDI practices and strategies. So we know this is going to take time. So we would anticipate that there may be some districts who would want or choose to continue to receive these supports into the next cohort.
So my question is really a follow-up to the previous one. So you gather data after 3 years and, you know, figure out where the help needs to be, but someone may choose to continue to receive the supports. Yes?
So first of all, this is our first implementation of the 3-year cycle. So we're in the second year of it, and we're preparing for the next year and learning from, again, as I said earlier, we want this to be a partnership that we're trying to help and make change. And one of the things we've learned over the years is to stick with it, right? So many times we get something started and then there's another shiny object or another initiative that is pushed that changes it. And so what we really want to do is work with districts and our AEAs to identify what more needs to be done in order to get to the place that they want to get to and we want them to get to. So I wanted to, the implementation support rubric, because we have such small districts, uses 3 years of data for an assignment. And then each year we look at the data elements in between there. And then next year, do I have my calendar? 2025, there will be another 3-year calculation of compressed data. So, and that will then include some of the data that were part of the changes, right, as they were implementing. The challenge in that, and this is probably too many details, but the challenge in that is some of the data are lag data. So like the indicator 14 data that Kelsey was talking about, that's a year behind. It's 1 year after they graduate. So districts may have great changes that might not show up in their data right away. So we're trying to figure out how we could add to the measure something about change, like a level of change that would help kind of balance that out a little bit. So the question is, these data are all based on students with IEPs. Yes, at the implementation support rubric. But in the drill down data that they do in their data conversation, many times, as Kelsey was showing, they have a comparison to the kids without IEPs in their district. Joy.
What would you suggest? So there's a lot of support for districts and bringing about this change. What would you suggest for parents who are currently, or, you know, like for my boys, we're looking at this down the road, it's coming up real fast. What do we need to do on our side to help drive this change and not let our kids get lost in this process where kids are getting lost? What can we do now to help with that?
So I think the most important thing, and I know I don't have to tell you this, but is to be an engaged parent and be informed and be involved in your students' education and planning every step of the way. So, for example, when you go to an IEP meeting, don't be afraid to ask the hard questions, and be a part of the team as you're identifying what those PSEs are, and ask questions. Okay, so my student's goal is this. So how are we going to get there? What are those opportunities that are available? So like that chart that I showed you earlier with the practices and the predictors, I would use that as a reference and bring that to an IEP team meeting and say, hey, like, which one of these would be a good match for my student, or how can we incorporate some of these strategies into my student's plan? I think that's a really good starting point, and I think that communication piece with identifying like what are your hopes for your student, what are your expectations, but then also like what are the things that you're seeing at home, and how can we work together to build skills in those areas, and just being really clear about your expectations is a good starting point. And Barb, you had more you wanted to add?
So first of all, for those of you who don't know, this is before I became state director, I was a transition consultant, and so I know that we're not supposed to have favorites, but this is my favorite area. I really don't like little kids, but I love adolescents. So Kelsey's exactly right in terms of expectations are really important, and family expectations for all kids make a difference. What I'm finding interesting is that back in, I think around 2007, we did a survey of parents just about what their expectations were. And the majority of expectations were and concerns were, is my child included in class? Does my child have friends in school? And what is it going to take to get a diploma? With very little expectations for what would be happening after. And now what I'm hearing from many parents is that expectation, they're now worried earlier, which is good because that it takes a long time. So setting those expectations is really important. And in IDEA, we are obligated as educators. It's a little throwaway line, but I think it's a really important line about the transition plan has to be based on the student's interests and preferences. And so many times I think what we do is we stop at interests. And so as a family member, if you can help your child identify what their preferences are and help them grow those preferences, and then help the school understand that as well, and that also goes a long ways. And I'm just going to, this is probably an overused example for some of you, but it's new for some of you, new material, I tell my husband, you either need new material or a new audience. So the distinction between an interest and a preference, I'm interested in being a size 8 or a size 10. But my preferences are to not exercise and to eat everything I want to eat. Those are not going to align, right? And so as we help kids grow, we have to give them opportunities to learn what's an interest and what's a preference. And so many times as educators, we just write down the interest and we ignore the rest. And so I have the mic. One of my favorite stories is a young man who they thought wanted to be a pilot. So the team did all kinds of things, wonderful things, to help this man work in, they got him a job in a small airport, doing some things there, knowing he couldn't be a pilot. He had cognitive disabilities, some gross motor limitations for stamina. But really, what it turns out is all he really wanted was the leather jacket. So, that was time wasted in job preparation because we didn't do a deep enough diagnosis around what the skills were. So that was one. And then I think the last thing I want to say that we need to do as a field, I just had this conversation coming in this morning. One of the things I've realized, I believe a lot of the materials we create for parents are really around participating in the IEP development. So if you think about that SDI framework that we were talking about, what kinds of supports have we given to educators and also to family members about participating in the design and delivery and the redesign of the execution and implementation of the plan, not just the design of the plan. And I think we need to get smarter about that so that we can be more intentional, so that it is a partnership and it doesn't feel like a conflict, because many times it feels like a conflict. So I think, do we have time? Yeah, one more. Sorry. That's all right. Go. She was giving me I haven't seen the 1 minute.
I work in transition, and I just have to respond to your question in the respect that one of the things that I see most effective is not just advocating, but being a true partner. You know, sorry, it's going to be a little bit of a soapbox because I work with some youth whose parents are saying, here's where they should be, here's what they should do, and they go home and they play video games all night. And so it's leaving me and the educators and the teachers with all the responsibility for preparing kids for employment. And the reason I work is because my parents made me at 11, And so I think encouraging and supporting families and doing that is just critical for the success of kids. And it's simple things like chores and volunteering and going to church and all the things that are typical, but so often we as families are exhausted by the time our kids get home.
It's not like they have those job opportunities. Yes, they can stack groceries at Hy-Vee, but how's that going to help them to be a nurse if that's what they want to be, or some of those other things. So sometimes the bar is so low, it's like, well, gosh, then I'm advocating for them to do all these things and active part in school and all of that, but then even our communities aren't helping to provide those opportunities, and it gets really discouraging. Even things that are designed for our kids, I know with my boys, I've experienced that a number of times, that things, activities or whatever, it's not really designed for my boys. Their needs are higher, and unless I provide the support or whatnot. So that's where I'm like, how can I help change this? Help others see the value in investing, because when my boys have the right support and they can be so successful, but if they don't fit the box that a lot of these things are created, then they're SOL.
Okay. Wendy.
So I'm curious, and my two questions kind of go together. Out of those schools that have the option to choose between early literacy and transition, I'm really curious how many of them are choosing transition, because I've been asking, and they're not transition. But then also, so I've been reviewing IEPs and things, and what I'm sensing now, that this is the first time I've seen like the second diagnostic, like that second diagnostic point is the one that's missing. And so how is that information going to get down into the special ed teachers, because they're writing these transition plans, and it's that piece that's the critical piece. That first one is great, but it's the second one that actually creates the plans.
Absolutely. I appreciate that question, because that is, exactly what we're trying to hit on with the SDI framework and this training is not just like, yes, we're identifying post-secondary expectations for every student, no problem, right? But how are we using that to then inform everything else that happens for that student after that. And that's what we're hoping to accomplish through training and professional development around the SDI framework, is that we are building really thorough, robust plans with comprehensive transition assessment to support the services, supports, instruction, linkages, et cetera, that we connect that student to. Mhm. Well, so yeah, that is the challenge. Yes, that's fair. So the question was, if they don't choose secondary transition, are they not getting this content? That is part of the challenge that we're still working through because of limited resources and capacity. Like, I tell you what, I would love to be able to have every district engage in this learning, but there are some limitations to that. So right now, we're really focused on the districts that need it the most based on their data, starting there, and then continuing to scale up and making the resources available for those who want them beyond that. So that's where we're starting right now. And I know that feels like a small drop in the bucket, but it is room for growth and it's a starting point. And
Right, but I think you've just brought us full circle, which I appreciate because I'm getting the hook over on the other end here. And that is why, so we started our compliance around secondary transition by reviewing IEPs and looking. We were the toughest state in the nation around looking at those, the content to make sure everything was coordinated together, and it didn't make a difference in practice. It didn't. Now with Achieve, honestly, if there's a word in there, whether it's the right word or not, it's going to flow through in terms of checking the boxes, because we can now look at the results. And so if we're getting good results, then whether it's right in the box, it doesn't matter because we're getting good results. We have a procedural violation. We don't have a FAPE violation. What we're trying to do is move these data, which is the purpose of IDA and that implementation support rubric, to meet that first obligation of the law, which is an emphasis on functional outcomes. So we're not there yet, but we're hoping that this process will get us further along than when we were just reviewing IEPs and having them change IEPs, but not change anything in service or practice. So I will end, I promise. But we are seeing more state complaints in this area, and it is clear from those state complaints that teams don't have the tools to make the right decisions. They may be doing things with good faith effort, but they're not ending with the result for FAPE.